Hello, everyone. It's your main man, Sportslav, with today's broadcast. Today is part two of what I call Football 101. It's basically helping you to try to figure out the basics of college football. And today, part two is going to be involving penalties. Everything that is penalized on a field is done by a group of officials that try to regulate the flow of the game, and they have a yellow flag that they'll throw off of their belt whenever any of these penalties occur. They're called fouls because it is things that are against the rules in the normal way of playing for football. So, with that being said, let's get into the details of every one of the penalties that they have in college football. And with that, it will include what they are, how it happens, and what the penalty is, or how many yards they add to or take away from different things when these happen. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and click the notification bell so you can be aware of all of my broadcasts whenever I'm doing them. And without further ado, we'll start with the chop block. A chop block is when two players block the same defensive player, one above and below the thigh. It comes with a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Clipping is next. Clipping is when a player blocks or falls into an opposing player from behind or below the knees. That penalty comes with a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. You have what's called a defenseless player, or what they commonly call as targeting, when a player makes unnecessary contact against a player who is in a defenseless position. This comes with a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down, and in the more severe cases, if they determine it's targeting with the crown of the helmet being used to initiate contact above the shoulders, it can lead to the player's disqualification or ejection from the game, on top of what I've already mentioned. You have next what's called defensive holding. Defensive holding is when a defensive player holds on to an opposing player by the uniform rather than only push blocking. Push blocking is the only thing that's allowed, not holding. It will prevent them from moving in a certain direction. With this, there is a 10-yard penalty for that. You have defensive offsides when a defensive player is over the line of scrimmage at the time of the snap, and that carries a 5-yard penalty. Defensive pass interference is when a defensive player disrupts an opposing player's attempt to catch a pass. It has to be blatant. It can't be just, a little bit is okay, but you can't just deliberately do that and knock them out of the way when they're trying to catch a pass. In doing so, it's a 15-yard penalty from the spot of the foul where it occurs at, and an automatic first down. If it happens and it's in the end zone, it'll be the ball will be placed at the 2-yard line, and it's an automatic first down. So, depending on where the penalty occurs, it could be 15 yards or it could be spotted at the 2, depending on if it's in the end zone or not. Delay of game is called on a team when a play is not started after a set amount of time has passed, usually when the play clock expires. It usually is a 5-yard penalty, but it can be 10 yards for the home team. In order to get a delay of game, you have 40 seconds from the time of a play that is concluded in order to start the next play. If after that 40 seconds has passed and a timeout has not been called or a play has not been started, the play is stopped, and that's where the delay of game occurs. Delay of game could also occur, like say you're coming off of a timeout and you have 25 seconds on the clock, and you still run the clock down to 0 and the play is not snapped. It's still the same result. Delay of kickoff is when a team commits a delay of game penalty during a kickoff. Same kind of penalty, just during kickoff, and it results in a 5-yard penalty. Disconcerting acts or signals is something you don't see very much, but it does happen. It's basically using words to basically confuse the offensive team during the snap. It's usually done by the defense, and it's a 5-yard penalty. It can cause an offense to be thrown into a decent case of confusion. Disqualification. Disqualification occurs when players' actions result in that player being removed from the game. It carries a 15-yard penalty, and it can occur with both offense and defense. Things that people can get disqualified for in a game is targeting. It could be fighting. It could be other things like unsportsmanlike conduct, which I'll get into as this video goes on. So bear with me on that one. Next is encroachment. Encroachment is when a defensive player illegally crosses the line of scrimmage before the snap and makes contact with an opposing player or has a clear path to the quarterback. That carries a 5-yard penalty. Next is an equipment violation. You don't hear that much, but it's when a player wears prohibited equipment or does not wear required equipment. That penalty will lead to a 15-yard penalty, a charged timeout to the team in question if they have any, and ejection of the player or players that this is affecting. Next, you have a face mask penalty. It's when a player grabs an opposing player by the face mask in any form or fashion. There used to be two different types of penalties for face mask. One was incidental and one was forceful. One used to carry a 5-yard penalty, and the other one carried a 15-yard penalty. But now, because of safety reasons and stuff, it doesn't matter what type of face mask it is. If it's incidental or if it's forcible, it's a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Next is fair catch interference. Fair catch interference is when a player on the kicking team touches an opposing return player who is called fair catch on the ball, or if the ball is touched before being caught by the player who called for a fair catch. It carries a 15-yard penalty. Note, a fair catch is a signal the returner can make to allow them to catch the ball on a kickoff or punt without being hindered by players on the opposing team. It is signaled by waving an arm in the air while the ball is in flight. Once the ball is caught, no further advancement allowed until the very next play. So the next thing is false start. False start is when an offensive player begins moving before the ball is snapped, and it carries a 5-yard penalty. Okay, next is forcibly contracting player out of bounds. And this doesn't happen often, but it can be referred to as a late hit. That happens, like say if the person's already out of bounds and the player is coming after them and hits them, whether it's on purpose or incidental, they have to determine that. But it basically is when a player hits the runner forcibly once they are out of bounds. It carries a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Sometimes, depending on the nature of these late hits, it could lead to other penalties like unsportsmanlike conduct. It could lead to other personal fouls, and it could also lead to ejection of the game if it's deemed bad enough. The next one is horse collar. A horse collar penalty is when a player grabs an opposing player from behind by the back collar of the uniform under the padding and pulls the player straight down off of their feet. That penalty carries a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. There's another one that you don't hear of very much, but it does happen. It's called illegal bat. An illegal bat is when a player purposely swats the ball when it is loose in any direction out of the end zone to keep the player from getting to the football. It carries a 10-yard penalty and a loss of a down. So if you got first down, you're on first down and this happens, you lose 10 yards, and then the very next play, instead of replaying the down as most penalties would be, it would be second down and 20, just as an example. Sometimes you hear of this one, but it's called illegal blindside block. It's when a player blocks an opposing player while that player is unable to see the incoming blocker and thus being defenseless. It carries a 15-yard penalty, and depending on how that hit is initiated, it could also be ruled as a form of targeting if certain rules apply. Okay, next is illegal block. above the waist. It's when a player blocks an opposing player who does not have the ball from behind and above the waist. With that carries a 10-yard penalty. Next is illegal contact. When a player makes contact with another player when they're not allowed contact at that time, it carries a 5-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Sometimes that can happen when, like, say, a member of a team was going for a pass, they didn't get it, but the defender was right there with them and stuff, and they give them a pat on the shoulder or a pat on the butt, saying, "Hey, that was a good play." Even though it's a form of sportsmanship showing that you're doing a good job with certain things, officials don't really care for that, and it's unsportsmanlike conduct in essence, and that's why they throw the penalty for that. Illegal contact can also occur with an official, and if that happens, there's more problems with that. It can actually cause the player to be ejected immediately out of the game. And we're not talking about just being disqualified. They're being disqualified and ejected, meaning they have to actually go to the locker room when this happens. That rarely happens, though, but it does happen from time to time. You have illegal crackback is the next one. It's when a player runs laterally across the field and blocks a defenseless player below the waist, and it usually carries a 15-yard penalty. It's not necessarily targeting per se, but some could call this a cheap shot, where basically you're just doing that just to make a point, even though that point doesn't need to be made. It's really more childish than anything, and some people just have tantrums when it comes to different things. So that's how it goes with it. Next is illegal cut block, and that's when a player blocks an opposing player by driving into their knees from the front. That's a 15-yard penalty. And depending on that 15-yard penalty, depending on how many yards you got to gain, it can lead to a first down if it's enough yardage. Next is illegal formation. An illegal formation is when players are lined up in an illegal formation at the time of the snap, and it's a 5-yard penalty. I won't go into detail about it stuff, but there's different formations and stuff based upon the rules of the game of football that you are allowed to do. And that would be a whole separate issue, and I'm not sure I'm going into that right now. But you're allowed to line up in certain ways depending on certain things, and within those rules, if you don't line up properly, you can get a penalty for not lining up properly for that position, which is allowed. An illegal forward handoff is when a forward handoff occurs following a forward pass, and it's a 5-yard penalty. So you can either hand it off to somebody or you can pass it to somebody, but you can't pass and then after the pass hand it off to somebody. Apparently that's a 5-yard penalty, and it's going to stop the play right there. Next on the list is illegal forward pass. An illegal forward pass is when a second forward pass occurs following a regular forward pass, or when the passer is past the line of scrimmage at the time of the throw, and it's a 5-yard penalty. So, put it simply, it's stuff. Once a quarterback throws the pass forward past the line of scrimmage, that person cannot throw it any further down the field on a secondary pass. That's one way. The other way is you have the line of scrimmage, and the quarterback cannot go past that line of scrimmage when throwing a football. Either way, it's going to result in a 5-yard penalty if it happens. An illegal kick and kicking a loose ball are pretty much the same thing, but it's when a play kicks the ball when it is loose, or a player kicks the ball when they are not allowed to make contact with the ball. It's a 5-yard penalty. Basically, an illegal kick would be like going for a kickoff and doing it before the signal from the referee that allows you to do the kickoff. Or if the football's loose on the ground and it's fumbled and you're kicking it intentionally to try to keep people from getting that. So both result in a 5-yard penalty. It's pretty much the same thing with very minor differences. An illegal motion is when a player moves or shifts before the ball is snapped in an illegal way. That's a 5-yard penalty. It has to do with the illegal formation stuff. It's very similar and stuff, but if you shift a certain way, it can cause the play to not line up right, and safety issues come into play. That play is blown dead. 5-yard penalty is applied. You don't hear of this much, but it does happen. Illegal peelback is when a player blocks an opposing player front side and below the waist. It's a 15-yard penalty for that. An illegal shift is when a player shifts illegally before the ball is snapped, similar to an illegal formation, and it leads to a 5-yard penalty and stuff. You could keep the same formation and just shift your front line and stuff. And if you do it the wrong way, it could literally cause a 5-yard penalty, but it still would make it an illegal formation at that point. An illegal substitution is when a player is substituted into the play while play is live, or it interferes with the game, and it carries a 5-yard penalty. Sometimes they try to do the substitution thing and do it as a 12th man on the field, and most of the time it's caught before the play is started, but sometimes it's not until afterward. And either way, if it's caught, it's a 5-yard penalty. Alrighty. We now have an illegal touching of a forward pass. It's when the ball is touched illegally after a forward pass. Only eligible receivers can touch a forward pass before any other member of the offense, and that's a 5-yard penalty otherwise. So really, if it's not a receiver that touches the ball beforehand, you can't do that. It's a 5-yard penalty. Next is illegal touching of a kick. It's when an illegal touching of the ball occurs after the kick, and it's a spot of the foul penalty. And depending on the severity of it, it can range between 5 and 15 yards, or it can result in a re-kick, depending on the severity of how it happens, when it happens. You have an illegal use of hands. Football is a game where you use your hands primarily and your feet when it comes to carrying the ball, but there is illegal use of hands when a player's hands make contact with an opposing player's face area forcefully during an attempt to make or get around a block. It's not exactly within the face mask, but basically like putting your hands on their helmet or something and using that to try to guide them and direct them in their movement. You can't do that. If it happens on the offense, it's a 10-yard penalty. And if it's on the defense, it's a 5-yard penalty and an automatic first down. So one is more severe than the other, but you really don't want to do that because it's still yards you'll end up losing. Having a thing called an illegal wedge. When 2 or more players line up shoulder to shoulder, less than 2 yards apart to perform a block. That's a 15-yard penalty. Common forms of that are like when 2 or 3 players hold hands with each other and form a chain link around each other or with each other while they're trying to make a block to make it very much impossible to get through it. That carries a 15-yard penalty, and it don't happen much, but sometimes they can, they think they can get away with it, and there might be times where they do indeed get away with it. But it's supposed to be a 15-yard penalty. Ineligible downfield kick is when a player other than the 2 players at the end of the line of scrimmage crosses the line of scrimmage prior to the kickoff or punt. It's a 5-yard penalty for that. That it does happen from time to time. You have an ineligible downfield pass when a forward pass is completed to an ineligible downfield receiver. An ineligible downfield receiver is any player who did not line up off the line of scrimmage, such as the offensive guards and tackles, and it carries a 5-yard penalty. Next is intentional grounding. It's when the passer intentionally throws the ball incomplete while under pressure from the defense in order to avoid a sack. It carries a 10-yard penalty and a loss of down. Next is invalid fair catch signal. I already went over what the fair catch signal was, but invalid one is when a player calling a fair catch does not correctly make the fair catch signal. It's a 5-yard penalty, and the fair catch signal is literally waving your arm once in the air, one complete wave, while the ball is in flight during a kick. In doing the invalid fair catch signal, it carries a 5-yard penalty. Next is kick-catch interference. Kick-catch interference is when a player makes contact with an opposing player who is receiving a kick before the ball becomes live. It carries a 15-yard penalty for that. Next is kickoff out of bounds. If you're kicking off the ball after after a score or to start the game or to start a half, and it goes out of bounds, or it is caught by a player out of bounds during the kickoff, it results in a 30-yard penalty. So your kickoff usually occurs at a certain line. So take 30 yards from that, and that's where the ball's going to be placed. It's a really hefty penalty, and you try to avoid doing that. Now, if you kick the ball out through the end zone and it goes out of bounds, it results in a touchback. And with the touchback, it results in the ball being placed at the 25-yard line. But this isn't about actual touchback. This is about the actual kicking it off out of bounds. Next is called leaping. Leaping is when a player jumps over the line of scrimmage in an attempt to tackle a player or block a kick, and then make contact with the player on the opposing team prior to or simultaneously as the snap occurs. With that penalty, it carries a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Next is what we call leverage. Leverage is when a player gets a boost over the line of scrimmage in an attempt to tackle a player or block a kick, and they make contact with a player on the opposing team prior or simultaneously as the snap occurs. It's similar to leaping, but you're not jumping for it. You're just finding a way to get that leverage without jumping. That one carries a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. The other one is also a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Next is what they call low block. A low block is when a player performs an illegal block that is below the waist of a player on the opposing team, and it leads to a 15-yard penalty. Next is neutral zone infraction. Neutral zone infraction occurs when a defensive player illegally enters the neutral zone around the line of scrimmage prior to the snap. Note, you have the line of scrimmage. The neutral zone is inside 1 yard from line of scrimmage that offense has. This occurs when the gap is breached by defense before ball is snapped, and it leads to a 5-yard penalty. The same thing happens on an offensive thing, and it would be called offside. So it's the same general rule, but one deals with the offense and one deals with the defense. Okay. Next is offensive holding. Offensive holding occurs when an offensive player holds a defensive player illegally. Holding occurs when a player grabs an opposing player by the jersey of the uniform to prevent them from moving in a certain direction, and that carries a 10-yard penalty. Next is offensive offsides. When an offensive player illegally crosses the neutral zone around the line of scrimmage prior to the snap, it's a 5-yard penalty. So basically, it's basically being past the line of scrimmage without making contact. That's offsides. Encroachment is where you actually make contact. It's the same concept, same penalty, same amount of yards, 5-yard penalty. Next is offensive pass interference. Offensive pass interference occurs when an offensive player performs an illegal action against a defensive player to prevent a pass from being defended properly, such as pushing the player or hitting the player or doing what you can to keep them from defending properly. It carries a 10-yard penalty. There's offside or free kick. Offside on free kick is when a player is offsides during a free kick or a kickoff, and that's a 5-yard penalty. Player out of bounds on kick is when a player illegally re-enters the playing field after stepping out of bounds on the kickoff. It's a 5-yard penalty. When you're in the playing field and stuff, you're there doing what you're supposed to do. If you step out of the playing field area and you step out of bounds for any reason, you have to be back on the field for 1 to 2 full seconds before you're considered eligible and back on the field again, before you can attempt to make any reasonable plays. And they do that for the reason that people try to cheat, and there have been people that have done that in the past, and they set that up to prevent that. And it carries a 5-yard penalty with it. So next is what we call removal of the helmet. When a player removes their helmet during a celebration or confrontation, it's a 15-yard penalty. Depending on the nature of what's going on, people do that in celebration and stuff, and then you get a 15-yard penalty, and then sometimes you could get an extra penalty on top of that for excessive celebrating. In confrontation stuff, it's not uncommon for players to take their football helmets off when they're confronting one another, and at that point, when you see that happen, you got to put a stop to it because those helmets become weapons. Either way, it's a 15-yard penalty for the initial act of that. Next is called roughing the holder, which you don't hear of very often. But if a defensive player comes into forcible contact with the holder of the football for a kick, it's a 15-yard penalty and carries an automatic first down. Next is roughing the kicker. Roughing the kicker is when a player makes contact with the kicker's plant leg on a kickoff or punt, and it's a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Roughing the kicker is like forcible or a very deliberate hit. Roughing the passer occurs when a defensive player makes harsh contact with the passer or the quarterback after the ball has been released for an allotted time. It's a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. So basically what that's saying is if the quarterback has the football and the quarterback has thrown a pass, you can defend the quarterback and you can do what you can to give the quarterback a hit. But if the ball is 30 or 40 yards down the field and you make a hit at him, it's roughing the passer forcefully. And it also depends on the intent of the blow. If you're trying to go on with your full weight and you're trying to knock him and slam him into the ground, that's obviously going to be rough for the passer. But sometimes you have what's incidental. It's incidental. It's basically the same concept, but you're trying to defend the play and you run into the quarterback, but you're not doing it forcefully. It still can be a penalty and it still carries the same amount, but not as bad. Running into the kicker is when a player makes contact with the kicker's plant leg on a kick or punt. It's similar, like I said, it's similar to roughing the kicker, but it's not as severe. So basically, roughing the kicker would be deliberately trying to plow into the guy that's doing that. Running into him is just when you're trying to defend as normal and stuff, and you barely make contact with them, and it's not as severe, but it still carries the same. It don't carry the same weight. If you run into the kicker and it's not, and it's obvious that it wasn't deliberate and it was just incidental as part of play, it's still a 5-yard penalty. A sideline infraction, you'll hear that occasionally. It's when a player or coach or a combination of that steps on the restricted area or across the sideline during the game. During a game, there is a white strip that is on the field near the sideline and stuff, and that white strip is where the officials have to be able to run up and down the field. So a sideline warning comes when a player or a series of players or a coach gets in that area and impedes the path of that official that needs that area to run up and down the field. The first time that you get called for that, it's a warning, basically stating that if it continues, you're going to be penalized. Sometimes they may not realize that they're actually too close for that, and they really don't intend to make the mistake of doing that. Sometimes they really just don't know. They're paying attention to the game, and they're not paying attention to where that sideline is, and it does happen regularly. Basically, if it happens a second time, it's a 5-yard penalty. And for the third time and for each time after the third, it carries a 15-yard penalty each and every time it occurs. Let's see. Next on my list is what they call striking, kicking, or kneeing an opponent. It's when a player strikes, kicks, or knees an opponent. It's a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down and can lead to ejection stuff. A lot of times this kind of stuff happens during fights and whatnot. The striking could be during fights. The kicking or kneeing could be doing it intentionally or forcefully just to make a point, when the player's down on the field. A lot of times when this kind of stuff happens, it can really lead to brawls where both benches get involved, and then you have to find ways to separate everybody. And yes, it does happen. Um, Next is what we call taunting. Taunting is when a player taunts the opposing team or opposing player. Like say after they make a great catch or they score a touchdown or they make a good tackle. It carries a 15-yard penalty and it's automatic first down. It is also a form of unsportsmanlike conduct. So I'll get into unsportsmanlike conduct here in just a bit. Too many men on the field. When the team or offense or defense has more than the allowed 11 in the field at any time, it's a 5-yard penalty, and that can be on the offense or on the defense. Next up is tripping. Tripping is when a player purposely uses their foot and trips an opposing player. And some teams do that intentionally as a way to keep someone from scoring a touchdown if they're on the run. It carries a 10-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Next is unnecessary physical contact with game official. When rough contact is made toward an official, it's a 15-yard penalty and the offending player is ejected. And in some cases, depending on how certain things are, that contact could also lead to fines for either the player or for the university that's involved. You're not supposed to make contact with an official at all, or at least rough anyway, because sometimes contact with an official is unavoidable because sometimes the officials do get in the way of things, but there is a way to determine whether it was incidental or if it was deliberate. What I was referring to in this penalty is the deliberate. The official penalty for that is a 15-yard penalty, and the offending player or players are ejected from the game. They're not just disqualified, they are ejected. Unnecessary roughness is next. Is when rough contact is made towards an opposing player when deemed unnecessary. It carries a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. So unnecessary roughness can include a late hit. It can include, hitting someone, knocking someone down, and like say when you tackle them and stuff, instead of just tackling them, you slam them to the ground, or it's a much harder tackle than what it needs to be. That's what they refer to as unnecessary roughness. Okay. Next is what they call unsportsmanlike conduct. When a player violates the rules of general sportsmanship, it carries a penalty of 15 yards and an automatic first down. Unsportsmanlike conduct is usually when things happen verbally, abusing of officials through verbal language, using bad verbal language on the field. And when I say bad verbal language, I don't mean the standard trash talk like you're talking to a team member, although that can be included. But we're talking about instances to where, say, a person commits a penalty and they say something along the lines, that involves expletives and other curse words in whatever said thing. That could get unsportsmanlike conduct because that stuff's not really allowed. Note, this can be called on individual players. It can be called on the whole bitch of a team or a coach. And because they're trying to keep sportsmanship as a main focus in the games, for good sportsmanship, regardless of whether you're winning or losing and stuff, you're allowed one unsportsmanlike conduct in a game. However, if you get two of them and stuff, the offending player will be ejected and disqualified. And it will lead to an ejection if you get two of them in a game. It don't happen very often where you get two in a game, but it isn't uncommon. It's more common to see someone get one in a game. All right. Now, there is one that it used to be allowed in all levels of football, including college football, and it's called assisting the runner. Assisting the runner is when an offensive teammate illegally pulls or lifts and carries a runner with the ball to advance them. It's a 5-yard penalty in high school football and a 10-yard penalty in college football and NFL. Assisting like say if a player's going down, with a tackle and stuff, but their knee has not made the ground, your teammate cannot lift you and pull you to advance the football to keep your knee from going down. You can't do that. And if it's not saying that don't happen, it probably does happen. But if it's seen, you will get penalized for that, and they frown upon that because that creates an unfair advantage. Now, I've gone over a lot of the penalties that occur, that you can see. There are, of course, some other ones, but they're so unusual and rare that I didn't mention them because of the fact that they're so rare that you might see it once every, in a very long time. Also, the NFL has other penalties as well that do not apply to college football, and we're not addressing NFL football at this point. We're just addressing the college football aspect of things. Some of the penalties that I mentioned are also addressed as personal fouls in the description of what it is. In definition, a foul involves an illegal physical contact that endangers the safety of another player. So in a lot of these penalties that's called, it's not uncommon for them to to say personal foul and then whatever the foul was, and then of course the enforcement of that. Now, in penalties and stuff, in some of these bad penalties and stuff, if you got an offensive player and a defensive player that commit the same penalty that results in the same number of yards, they have what is called offsetting. It's basically, the penalties occurred, but because nobody's going to gain the yards or lose the yards, it basically goes on record that they got the penalty, but no yards are assessed because sometimes in situations of unsportsmanlike conduct, just as one example, you have one player who says something with some abusive language, and then you have the opposing team player saying similar or other abusive language, and the official hears that. That's what they mean by offset. In a situation like that, when it offsets, they just replay the down, and it's like it's a replay. It's like it never even happened. I mean, it happened, but in terms of the enforcement, it's basically one cancels out the other. Now, in most cases, you have what they call live ball fouls and what they have as dead ball fouls. Live ball fouls are penalties that occur when it is in live play. You can get multiple penalties on a live play. However, what they usually do is if there's multiple fouls in a live situation, they'll mention what the penalties were, but they'll enforce the one that has the strongest penalty. Say, for instance, you get a false start, but the play continues, and then during that you get a holding call. Anyway, what they'll do is they'll take the severest of it. Now, in a lot of cases, like say you get a live ball foul, and then after the play is over with, you get a dead ball foul, which a dead ball foul is just when it's occurring when the ball is not in live play. Most of the time, unless they offset, which they rarely do in that situation, you can enforce a live ball foul and a dead ball foul simultaneously, meaning that in a certain case, you do it's something that's worth a 15-yard penalty in live play, and then say after the play is over with, you say some things you shouldn't say. That's a dead ball. That's an additional 15 yards. Now, if that happens on one team, you're going to have multiple penalties and stuff. But typically, what they would do is you can enforce one live ball penalty and as many dead ball penalties as possible if it's all on the same team. However, if you have a combination of that and it's on both teams, it'll offset and it'll just replay the down. It'll go on the record that it occurred, but no yards will be penalized because it's basically canceling the other out. That is all I have today regarding penalties and whatnot. Now, there are additional penalties that could potentially happen in lower levels like high school, middle school, and youth league, but we're not going to cover those. You can find those probably through your local NFL webpage or your school administrator's website or your state association for where you play the game. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. And again, I hope that you would subscribe to my channel Send me some love. I'm at youtube.com/@sportslove. I would appreciate if you would also hit the like button so that way more people can find out about what's going on with this, and hit the notification bell so that way you can make sure you get all my live streams and all my videos. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and peace out.